Good morning to everyone. As everyone's settling in, we appreciate you being here this morning. For having visitors, thank you for being with us this morning. If you are visiting with us, we're going to be in the Ecclesiastes. If you want to turn over there, Brother Marshall's going to be leading that study in just a moment. This time we'll have a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. Almighty God, our Father in heaven, we truly are thankful that you have been so kind and good to bestow upon us another beautiful day. And we're thankful that we now have the opportunity to come together as a group of your people and take this time to study from your word. Later this morning, offer worship to you, and may all that we do be acceptable to you, Father. Pray that as Marshall leads our study of Ecclesiastes, that he's obviously, we know, prepared well, and that he can bring to us things to consider and to think about as we've studied also. We're thankful for these revealed messages, Father, and as we look into Ecclesiastes, help us to see the lessons that we can gain from considering the two alternatives of thinking about only things under the sun or things in the heavens, Father. We thank you for these times that we can do this, and may it spur us on to further study. Be with all those that are with us this morning, and may you bless us with attentiveness and with the desire to serve you, Father. In all things, may your will be done. In Jesus' name, amen.
Looks like we'll be up in just a moment. As was announced, we will be in the book of Ecclesiastes. And I don't want us to not think this morning, but I know that we have had a long and mentally exhausting week as we've been working through a lot of deep things, but also very simple things when you get to it. But I think it will be helpful for us to just kind of take a step back and study through the book of Ecclesiastes, and hopefully give us some things to think about from this set of scriptures. I will say that I do believe it was helpful for us to witness what spiritual warfare looks like, where you have two capable people who are then looking at the scriptures, and Bruce did a good job of describing God's nature, God's plan, and how we fit into it. The book of Ecclesiastes deals with more of an under-the-sun perspective. It deals with the idea of what we have to deal with here as we think about our relationship with the world, but also our relationship with God. And that's something that we're going to see as we move forward. But as we're just starting, it's going to seem somewhat bleak. As I was prepared, my wife is teaching the 2-year-olds right now. And so she just, every now and then in our conversations, but also sees some of the PowerPoints that I'm making. She saw the main points for this set of PowerPoints. And she was like, well, that seems somewhat depressing. And I hope it doesn't come across as depressing, at least as we study it out and see what the applications might be. But there is a sense in which Solomon is painting a fairly bleak picture here at the beginning. Let me turn these on so I can see right along with you. I may not be smarter than the equipment, so we'll see. All right. So I'll look back every now and then until I can see in front of me. I have this outline that I had shared with you a week ago as we looked at kind of the overarching scope of the book, and suggested that verses 1 through 11 is kind of an introduction to what he is trying to accomplish in this book. And I've labeled this a futile and fleeting existence, because that's how Solomon is going to portray life under the sun in these first 11 verses. He's going to continue that theme, but then he's going to be offering some hopeful elements as we work our way through the book. We're not going to see a lot of those hopeful elements here in these first 11 verses, but we, of course, know the rest of the story. We've read through this text, you've read through this text, you've begun answering the questions, and you know where this is leading. That it's going to get to a point where we say, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole of man. And we're going to see that that is his purpose, but that is also his joy. And that when we have God in the picture, there is hope and there is satisfaction in the midst of what could appear to be a worthlessness, a vanity to this existence. So, as we look at these first 11 verses that I've labeled a futile and fleeting existence, I want to suggest that the first part, we might say, is just the vanity of vanities section, where he is introducing this idea of vanity, and then he's going to keep coming back to that throughout the book, either just using the word vanity, or by the end of the book, vanity of vanities. And remember, we already talked about that shows kind of this extreme vanity idea. And so we'll think about that as we work our way through. Let's read these verses again. The words of the Speaker of the Assembly, the Son of David, the King in Jerusalem, vanity of vanities, says the Speaker of the Assembly, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. So I want us to think through a couple of ideas just from this first text. And I said that we would investigate more this word vanity. This is the Hebrew word hebel. And so what we have, or hebel, not the ch at the beginning, hebel, which is the idea of vanity, but it's used 39 times in Ecclesiastes out of 73 of the entire Old Testament. And what have we talked about previously? If you have a lot of repetition in a book, what does that probably say? This is important. This is thematic. He wants us to see that he is using this word over and over and over again more than any other author in the Old Testament, because he wants us to see vanity. Now, he's going to help us to see past the vanity, but he wants us to see the vanity. And this word, I think he has chosen this because it has a range of meaning. Now, what we have to be careful of is that when we see this word vanity, we don't see every possible meaning in each occurrence, but we can see how he is going to play with this word, because this word can mean emptiness, it can mean brief, it can mean meaninglessness, and I think he's going to tap into each of those in different contexts and just have that umbrella word of hebel, vanity, to kind of portray this. Now, one occurrence of the word vanity that I don't think he is getting into, but is in Deuteronomy 32 and verse 21, you're not going to see the word vanity, brief, meaningless. What you're going to see in your translation most likely is the word idols. Now, that has to be in the background of just about anything that you might study, because, of course, the law is the basis upon which everything else in the Old Testament is based. But they would often refer to the idols as the vanities of the nations. Why do you think they would do that? They're empty. They can't speak, they can't hear, they can't answer, they can't do anything like that. There is an emptiness to them. And furthermore, if you've got a God who is the I am who I am, who to use maybe more New Testament language, though it does borrow from Isaiah, who was and is to come, he is not futile, he is not fleeting. And so these idols are, but God is not. And so they would describe idols as vanity. And so that's why our translations determine to say, we're just going to translate this as idols because we might miss it if we just rendered it as vanities. But it's not only idols. It can be connected to idolatry, but it's not only idolatry. For instance, in Job 7 and verse 16, this word is translated as breath. And so his idea is that his life is just a breath. His life is just a vapor. What is it about a breath that is vain, that is hebel? It passes away very quickly. We don't even think about the number of breaths we probably take in a minute. What is the average? Somewhere between like 15 and 20 breaths per minute. But he is saying, that's my life. It's just a breath. It's just passing away very quickly. I do think Solomon does pick up that kind of idea in this book sometimes. He'll talk about the fleetingness. It's very quick as you look at life. You see Job again in 27 and verse 12, where it is translated vanity, and that carries more the idea of meaninglessness or purposelessness. Psalm 39 and verse 11, same thing. And then Proverbs 21 and verse 6, again, breath. And so we get this picture of vanity, that it can be something that is empty. It can be something that is very quick, very transitory. It can be something that is purposeless. And I think he's going to tap into that as we work our way through the book. So watch for it. In fact, in just about every Bible that I've owned that I've read through in Ecclesiastes, I underline every time I see the word vanity. And I want to figure out, yes, I like the consistency. In fact, I want my Bible to say either vanity or something futile every time, but I want to be watching for the different uses of that word. Is he talking about more the purposelessness side, or is he talking more about the fleetingness side? Watch for those things as we work through this. And now he's characterizing everything is either purposeless or fleeting, and he's going to try to parse that out as he works his way through the book. Any thoughts on that? All right, something we did talk about last time is the idea of vanities, and I'm just going to rehearse it for those who haven't been with us. Why would he say vanity of vanities in the Hebrew style? Emphasis, just like holy of holies or servant of servants. This is going to the extremes, or as it's commonly called, the superlative. And so you have here, this is complete vanity. Now, that's a pretty bleak picture, isn't it? He's basically saying either life is utterly purposeless or it is totally fleeting. Now, why is he doing that? We'll make our way through that. Now, I want to offer the other side of the coin. This is not something that Solomon is denying, but it is something I think we need to think about. Is Solomon revealing an unqualified truth when he says that everything is futile and fleeting? And I don't think he is. It is not that he is saying there is nothing eternal, that there is nothing that is purposeful, but he is setting the stage for this is what it's like under the sun. If you lose sight of the eternal, if you lose sight of the transcendent, if you lose sight of that which does have meaning, then this is what life is going to become. Do we see that in our culture today? If you're interested in doing a deep dive into the philosophies of the modern times, you can listen to Stephen and Caleb Westbrook's podcast on renewing restoration that kind of gets to some of those ideas that from which we have come as a people. I think we're seeing the fruition of this kind of what do we do if once we realize we can't figure this all out and there doesn't seem to be anything that is absolute here on earth, what do we do without God? Well, we're seeing what people think life is all about without God. It's nothing. And they're feeling the effects of that, and they're searching for something that does have meaning, that does have eternity. And we're going to talk about the meaning of this in chapter 3, but he has set eternity in our hearts. That's supposed to push us toward God, to that which is, to him who is eternal. All right, so in this opening chapter, don't get so lost in all the depressing language that you assume that Solomon doesn't believe in God and doesn't believe in a purpose for man. But he is setting the stage for it. This is what it looks like if you lose sight of those things. All right? So that leads us to our second major idea. And I raise it as a question: is there no profit under the sun? And so this is verse number 3. What advantage does a person have in all his labor that he labors under the sun? Now, in this expression, labor which he labors, we're going to talk about it more in just a minute, but isn't that kind of like vanity of vanities? Labor which he labors. There's an emphasis here, so be watching for that, but also the idea of advantage. And so I want us to think about this idea of advantage. You have the noun here that is used throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. I just say watch for this word advantage, or whatever your translation may say there, profit, something along those lines. Because I think he is going to have kind of it almost seems like there's no profit idea as here. And then he's going to show some things that if you connect life to this, maybe there is some profit in this. And so we're going to be watching for how does he transition from it seems like there's no advantage to now here's a way that you can have advantage. So let's watch for that as we work our way through the book. I do want us to look at a couple of passages that illustrate how that he does see some, kind of gives an optimistic view of there is advantage when connected to wisdom and divine wisdom. In chapter 2 and verse 13, 2:13, and I saw that there is an advantage in wisdom over simple-minded folly, as light has an advantage over darkness. I will say on the screen, if you may not be jotting down notes, but if you are, I put down the wrong verses on chapter 5. We're not going to turn and read those, but it should be 5:9 and 5:16. I was using as I was doing my searches, I was actually searching in the Hebrew text, and it's one verse off in chapter 5, so that's why I wrote them down incorrectly. But in chapter 7 and verse number 12, he says, "For wisdom is a shadow of protection, as money is a shadow of protection, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of its masters." And then finally, chapter 10 and verse 10. 10 and verse 10, "If the axe is dull and he does not sharpen its edge, then he must exert more strength. Wisdom has the advantage of giving success." So as you watch for this word profit or advantage, it starts off, vanity of vanities. What advantage is there? He's going to say, wisdom has an advantage. But what he's going to do that is different than Proverbs is he's going to say, it depends on how you're applying that wisdom, how you're viewing that wisdom. Because if you're looking for wisdom apart from God, you're going to look at this world and see a lot of cases where wisdom doesn't seem to play out. So how does it have an advantage? He's going to show you how it has an advantage. He's not anti-Proverbs. He's just giving us the other side of the coin of what about the reality? How does this stuff work out in the midst of a reality that is fallen? He is not saying that Proverbs is not generally true. He's just saying there are some exceptions, and we got to be prepared for it if we want to have any kind of advantage in this life. All right, that brings us to that idea of labor, and he uses the verb form and the noun form, and he puts them together for emphasis. So, in the labor which he has labored. There are many times where the Bible will do that, and translators sometimes feel like it feels a little redundant, and so they don't translate it for us. And so I think it is helpful for those translations that do give us a rendering that sounds redundant, but there's a reason for the redundancy. They don't have the exclamation point. This is how they give the exclamation point. And so it's like, what advantage for all the increasing labor that I've done in this life? That's kind of the sense of what he's trying to get across. And he may be even pointing to not just the intensity, but the pain that could be associated with that toil, with that labor in a sin-cursed world. And I give you several passages on the screen. I just want us to look at Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 18. Again, all those verses in chapter 5 are off by one. They should be one later, so 15 turns to 16, 17 turns to 18. But in 15 and verse 18, he says, "Here is what I have seen to be good, which is beautiful, to eat, to drink, and to see good in all one's labor in which he labors under the sun during the few days of his life which God has given to him. This is his portion." Now we're seeing some phrases come together here that I think are important, and we're kind of revealing the hand as we are looking at the kind of sad side of chapter 1, saying, could there be any possible advantage in the labor which you labor under the sun? Yes. You can have profitability. You can have a portion that comes from God. But how are you going to get that? It is not by having the under the sun perspective that loses sight of God. And so we're going to watch for that as we work our way through the book. And I've already mentioned it, but I will note that Solomon repeatedly used the phrase under the sun in his book, again, several times, 29 times, and he's describing the condition and or possibly the location of humanity in contrast with God. I think it is helpful for us to see under the sun as kind of a contrast with those who have a picture of the realm of God, not just heaven, but the picture of trying to do the will of God and trying to receive the wisdom of God in the fear of God. This would be similar to, as I'm teaching a couple of men the book of Revelation right now, it's not that the people who belong to God do not dwell on the earth, but when he uses that phrase, those who dwell on the earth, he's got a specific target in mind. That's those who don't follow the Lamb. That's not those who do not serve God. Solomon is going to use this phrase under the sun often to carry the idea of here are the earth dwellers who do not have their gaze through the clouds to heaven, who cannot see God in the midst of this. And he's going to show this could be good or this could be terrible. It depends on what your perspective of God is, how your life under the sun is going to be. As an example, look at chapter 5 in verse 2. And this one is not off by a verse. Chapter 5 and verse 2, it's a little bit later that it starts to get off. Do not be hasty with your mouth or impulsive in your heart to bring up a matter in the presence of God, for God is in heaven and you are on earth, therefore let your words be few. So, God is in heaven, you're on earth. So, we are under the sun. We are on earth. We are not in heaven, as it were. But he's saying you can have a relationship with God that will allow you to see purpose, meaning, and intent while you are under the sun. So we're going to be watching for that. Watch for the sun. That's another one of those phrases that I have underlined every time in the book of Ecclesiastes. Every time I see under the sun, and then usually I give a dotted line to every time I see under heaven or something along those lines because those seem to be parallel. So he's asked the question, it seems like there's no prophet under the sun. At this point, we don't have the answer. He's in fact going to give further evidence why it seems like there is no prophet under the sun. But let's keep this perspective in mind as we move forward, that's for the person who does not understand God is in heaven, who doesn't understand that this person can be in connection with the God who is not under the sun. You can have meaning in life and you can find profit, not in the way that the earth dweller does, but in the way that the person who looks to God and is pious toward him. All right, any questions about this section or this verse? All right, then we're going to go into a somewhat longer section here, chapter 1, verses 4 through 7. I've labeled this an unrelenting cycle. An unrelenting cycle. All right. It says here, a generation comes and a generation goes, but the earth stands forever. Moreover, the sun rises and the sun sets, and it hurries to its place where it rises. The wind goes to the south and then rounds to the north. Round and round the wind goes, and the wind returns to its rounds. All the streams go to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams go, there they go again. Now, in this translation, you notice round, 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 round. We're going to come back to that idea, but that is what lies underneath the English text there, is he keeps using the word for circle, or the word for round in this text, and thus the title, An Unrelenting Cycle. So Solomon, whose wisdom extended to natural phenomena, recognized the apparent purposelessness of a purely under-the-sun existence. I have 1 Kings 4, 39 through 34 up there. Do you remember some of the things that Solomon wrote about?
Mine's not real clear, but a lot of things were the things of nature, the things that, take place on a continual basis in this life.
Yeah. Solomon was observing. He was observing trees. He was observing the earth. He was observing things that were happening, as to use the language of Ecclesiastes, under the sun. Personally, I do not believe Ecclesiastes chapter 1 is giving us scientific foreknowledge. I think these were things that Solomon could observe as the wisest man in the earth, and he could say, this is what seems to be happening. It's just a continual cycle. He's not focusing on, yes, there's evaporation, and then there is a coming back into the sea. He's saying, this seems like a worthless cycle. It just keeps on going and going and going. It's not stopping. That's the perspective he has. And I also think that sometimes we, just as kind of an aside, we see a scientific foreknowledge. Maybe that's an assumption that we have borrowed from the modern world, that humanity could not observe as much as we can observe. I think they could observe a lot of things. That's not to say that there weren't certain things that God revealed to them that they would not have known otherwise. But here I don't think we see an example of that. I think this matches what we see in modern scientific meteorological study, is that yes, there is a cycle, but Solomon saw that, And what that did for him is to say, it seems like everything is vain. Why? Because everything keeps rounding round and round and round and round. And he doesn't see the ultimate purpose when there's all this cycle. So I think as this wise man who looked at the earth, he saw this, and from an under the sun perspective, he's saying, what is the point? Now, the repetition of the words round or circle, you can see the Hebrew transliteration up there on the screen. You can see they're almost spelled exactly the same, but it emphasizes that endless cycle. And so round and round and round it goes. So why does Solomon highlight the coming and going of generations and the unrelenting activity of nature? As I have on the screen, I think he likely intends to demonstrate the impermanence of humanity. One generation comes, another generation comes, but also I'm going to put superficial monotony of creation and the lack of ultimate progress. It was probably about 6 months ago now that I preached a lesson on why restore. And one of the points I tried to make is that it is a myth to say that we are progressing as the human race. There may be certain technologies that we have developed. That does not mean we are progressing, at least spiritually and philosophically, as it were. And so when Solomon looks at the world, what does he see? He sees, hey, here's a generation. They have some findings. He says, that's already happened. There's nothing new. It's the same over and over and over again. And you know what? One generation rises, and then the next generation rises, and the next generation forgot everything that the first generation learned. And so now you've even lost that. And so it's a constant cycle of, oh, we are the best, we are progressing, but no, you fall right back. And so it's a back and forth, back and forth. And he says, right in the midst of this, creation itself is just going in circles. Can you see kind of the disillusionment, kind of the depressing quality of trying to view life as just under the sun? It's like, what is the point? This reminds me of 2 Peter chapter 3. There will be mockers who come and say, everything is continuing as it always has been. So that raises a question. Does Solomon have this, is he a mocker? I don't think he is. And in fact, I think I might have a little bit more on that in the next point. But he is offering a perspective that says, if you don't take God into account, this is what you're going to be left with. An unending cycle of creation, an unending cycle of seeming progress and fall, and that is really nothing new altogether. So how are you going to break that cycle is really the ultimate question, I think, in the book of Ecclesiastes. I think a lot of people in our world are looking to break the cycle. They don't have the direction that they need apart from God. And that's where this is our job. Our job is to come in and say, God set this up, and it's not going to remain permanently. God has a purpose, and you've got to see him if you want to break out of this cycle of nothing new and losing everything you've gained. You have to look to the Lord. All right. Any comments or questions on this cycle here in Ecclesiastes 1? All right, that brings us to the next section here, wearisome and worthless activity. And we will finish up with these 3 verses, but then I have a follow-up question at the very end if we have time for some application of this. It says, all things are wearisome, no one can speak of them. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything about which someone may say, look at this, it is new? It has already been from the ages that were before us. There is no remembrance of the former things, and even the future things that will be, there will be no remembrance of them among those who will be in the future. All right, so that droning cycle of creation and generations, Solomon says that is tiresome. That is wearisome. It makes you tired to think about that endless cycle from an under the sun perspective. This word weary is the same word that's used in Deuteronomy 25 and verse 18 when it says, when the people of Israel were weary, that's when Amalek came and fought against them. So what do you have a picture of? You've got 2 million people walking through a deserted area who are trying to make it wherever God wants them to be, and yet the trudging through, trying to continue on, and then the enemy comes. It's kind of that idea of just the hands hanging down, the weariness that comes from that. In 2 Samuel 17 and verse 2, this was a similar idea when we were thinking about the idea of weariness. This was the advice of Ahithophel, is catch David when he's weary, when he's broken, not only physically but also mentally. He says that's the kind of weariness that comes to us when we sit and think about an under the sun perspective, or if that's the kind of perspective we have. Does it build up your mind to feel invigorated to work when you think, man, everything is worthless, everything is fleeting, everything's happening the way it's always happened. I'm just one generation, the next generation is going to come, there's nothing new. If that is your total life view, that's your worldview, it is going to be exhausting. I want to suggest that it was the foundations in this country of there is a God, Jesus is God's Son, and the Bible is God's Word, that gave hope to people that through the weariness they could accomplish great things. But now we have taken all those things away, and what do we have? We have a spike in suicide rates. We have a spike in violence toward the innocent. Why? Because it's all worthless. It's all purposeless. That's what under sun perspective does. It makes you weary and you're ready to give up and you're ready to take out that disillusionment on others. Now, I have just an interesting little side bit here. You can see 2 Hebrew words spelled out where they're in verse number, let me get back to it, chapter 1 and verse 10. Nope, that's not what I'm looking for. Yes. All things are wearisome. Man is not able to speak of it. I kind of like the way the NIV translates that, but there's a word play here that you can't really translate in English. The word for things and the word for speak are almost identical. And so it's almost like you got another exclamation point of everything of which you could speak of, there's nothing more you could say about it. You could exhaust the speaking about it. Again, he keeps on in the poetry of it, in the sense of it, he keeps on bringing up this exclamation point of it all seems entirely worthless. That's the perspective Ecclesiastes wants you to start with, is under the sun, everything seems completely worthless. No progress, though people may involve themselves in endless pursuits and claim to have discovered something new. Solomon says, no, you haven't. You haven't really made any progress. He uses the idea of the eye and the ear and so on and so forth. That should remind us of Proverbs 27 and verse 20, that just like Sheol and Abaddon, it's never satisfied. Again, 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 and 4, the mockers are saying that everything is continuing as it were. Is Solomon a mocker? Is this the perspective he's taking? There are some people who read Ecclesiastes and say, whoever wrote this book is a skeptic and has lost his faith in God. Now, that is a misreading of the entire context of the book of Ecclesiastes, but how do we reconcile the Solomon we see in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 with the Solomon who is presenting this in Ecclesiastes chapter 1? Does he really believe that everything is purposeless and everything is just going to continue in a cycle forever and ever and ever and ever? What do you think?
Laying the groundwork, laying the foundation for despair, and then he brings it around and says, here's why, if you have the right perspective in life, there's no room for despair. There's no need for despair.
Yeah, so there'll be something to bring you through the despair. You won't have to have the despair of purposelessness. You may have the despair of oppression, but you can see through that despair. And so I think that's right. He's laying some foundations here. He is not a skeptic who has lost all faith. Here is a person who is purposely crafting the book of Ecclesiastes to say, this is what it feels like, but that's not where you have to be. You can come out of this under the sun perspective. You can move past it. All right. A new generation forgets what has happened before it and suffers the same fate, which leads Solomon to his conclusion that all is vanity in verse number 11. All right, so in chapter 2, verses 15 through 17, I want us to see some similarities, but we're beginning to turn a corner even in chapter 2. In Ecclesiastes 2, beginning in verse 15, "Then I said in my heart, as is the fate of the fool, so will be my fate also. Why then have I been extremely wise? So I said in my heart, this too is vanity. For there is no remembrance of the wise man along with the fool forever, inasmuch as in the coming days it will be forgotten, and how the wise man dies with the fool. So I hated life, for the work which I had done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is vanity and striving after the wind." All right, so in chapter 2, he says, if everything seems purposeless, let me try some things to see if I can find meaning. Did he find ultimate meaning in those things that he does in chapter 2? No, he does not. And in fact, he says, this is vanity. In fact, all is vanity. And so we need to see what is happening here, where chapter 1, you just observe, and it seems like everything's worthless. Solomon tries a different tactic. Okay, let my observation involve me. Let me do some work here. Let me see if there's something I can acquire that will give meaning. No, it doesn't. That's why you need the end of chapter 2. The end of chapter 2 says, now you can see this is a gift of God. And this is how you're going to find meaning in this life. You can compare that to chapter 9, verses 5 and 6 on your own. I want to come to this final question and spend the remainder of our time on this. How do we apply this somewhat depressing and the disillusionment of chapter 1? How can Christians today guard against discouragement when life feels empty and repetitive?
Remember the purpose of our existence? We have a purpose. If you're just looking for satisfaction and fulfillment in this life, there is room for discouragement. But we have a purpose for our existence. We should be focusing on spiritual goals, that is, spiritual onward pressing. Also remember the brevity of life, that it is fleeting, but there's something better waiting. There is hope. And so therefore, during this time, there is work to be done.
Right?
Learn to find joy in the simple things of life. He goes to say that the eye is not satisfied, the ear is not satisfied. We're constantly chasing new music, new movies, all kinds of things to satisfy us, and never will. And but if we just go sit on the front porch and enjoy the family, enjoy the outdoors, eat a meal together, those are simple things. Those are gifts of God.
Very good. And I do think that is true. I'll get to you in just a second, Brother Lance. I do think there's going to have to be something founding that, because I do think there are a lot of people who are like, hey, I'm just going to go off the grid and I'm really going to enjoy life a lot better. But they don't have their ultimate purpose in mind. And even those things are going to lose meaning. But you're stating what Ecclesiastes is going to say is built on the foundation of God. Those simple things are going to mean a lot more. Lance?
One of the things we can do is we can live in His Word, lamp to our feet, light to our path, live for Him in every aspect of our life, but count on each other, love each other as we should, be there for each other, be a family. We're all part of the body of Christ. Let's be together, raising up.
Absolutely. We're going to come to a text that says two are better than one, and a threefold cord is not easily broken. I do think something we need to keep in mind is people have not just lost it all when they see the failures of a fallen world. And we need to recognize that we do live in a fallen world. What's going to help us through that? And we'll talk about that more next time. Thank you for your participation.